On the day Laura retired, she came to school for the last time, carrying the classic leather bag she had used for 20 years. As always, she dressed simply and tied her hair back. She was known for her elegance and her silence. A quiet woman who had left deep marks. That day, the school hall was lightly decorated, but it was understated, almost as if it were just a regular meeting. All the staff and the senior students were there, but it seemed like no one was really there to respect the 30 years of hard work of a teacher. Some teachers were whispering in the backstage, while students were playing with their phones. The principal stepped onto the stage. The microphone was crackling. "Today, we say goodbye to a valued colleague," he said. "But we didn't want to send her off without a laugh." Then, the assistant principal came in holding a large gift box. He handed it to Laura. "Surprise," the principal said. "We put a lot of thought into choosing this mug." Laughter spread through the room. Laura thanked him and opened the box. The mug inside was just an ordinary ceramic one, but the real issue was the message on it. "Outdated teacher, enjoy your retirement, dinosaur." A group of students started laughing. One of them whispered, "She's still wearing the same clothes." The principal tried to save the situation by saying, "Of course, it's just a joke." But it was too late. Even when some of the teachers stopped laughing, a few students were still recording videos. Laura, however, just smiled, as if nothing had happened. She took the mug in her hand and said, "How thoughtful." At that moment, no one could see what was going through her mind. No one noticed how broken her heart was, or how lonely she felt, because Laura never wanted to be in the spotlight. But this wasn't what she deserved. With grace, she stood up. She shook the principal's hand. She glanced at the students one last time. Then she left the hall, putting the mug into her bag. Her eyes were full, but not a single tear fell, because this story wouldn't end in shame for her. And no one knew, but Laura's life was just beginning. When Laura returned home that night, the silence hit her hard. She hung her keys on the hook and slowly placed the mug on the table. The mug was still there. She read the message on it over and over again. "Outdated teacher, enjoy your retirement, dinosaur." Each time she read it, something inside her broke, but still, no tears fell. She was a teacher. She had gotten used to it. To staying quiet, to being ignored, to the mockery, to the belittling. And yet, every morning, she still walked into her classroom. The only constant in Laura's life had been her classrooms. The small wooden desks, the smell of pastel crayons, the silent, pleading looks. If anyone truly knew her, it was her students. And they knew exactly who Laura was. Years ago, there was a child in her class, a child whose name is now forgotten. His notebooks were a mess, his binder torn. His mom went to work, his dad wasn't around. When Laura noticed the child's shoes were torn, she didn't tell the principal. Instead, one Sunday, she bought new shoes out of her own budget and left them in the class cupboard, making it look like a lost donation. The child came to class smiling that day. No one noticed his smile, except Laura. Another year, a migrant girl who couldn't speak English joined the class. She was shy, trembling as she said her name. When the other students mocked her, Laura didn't yell at them angrily. She gained her trust by reading books with her during recess. Within months, that girl became the top student in the class. On graduation day, she gave her first thank you. "You gave me a voice." Every year, there was a child who cried quietly in the back row during report card time. Laura always knew why. Because her empathy wasn't written into the curriculum, but it was in her soul. She didn't look at her students the same way. She read each of their stories, felt the pain between the lines. Some parents disapproved of her too sensitive nature. Principals saw her simplicity as ineffectiveness. But she knew that sometimes, for a child to hold on to life, all it takes is one hand. Sometimes, she secretly sent stationery to her students' homes. She'd take some to the library after school, helping them solve tests, do homework. Even though she had no children of her own, she became a mother figure to hundreds of kids. But she never expected anything in return. She never received an award, never had her name announced. In fact, some years, she wasn't even listed as the most productive teacher. Because Laura didn't like the spotlight. She was like a star that shone in the dark, silent but guiding. Now, that woman had been sent off from the school she dedicated her life to with a cheap joke. But the children she had touched in the past had grown up. Some were engineers, some were doctors, some were artists. And one of them, when they randomly watched a video of this story, didn't forget what had happened. On the contrary, they took action. Laura didn't know yet, but very soon, the seed she had unknowingly planted years ago would turn into a storm. On the top floor of the office building, the morning sun filtered through the glass walls, bathing the large office in a golden glow. Modern furniture, expensive artworks, and an ultra-quiet air conditioner. Everything whispered that the man was on top of the world. The man sitting at his desk, despite his expensive suit, felt uneasy. His fingers tapped the edge of his laptop, and his eyes were stuck on a video paused in the middle of the screen. In the video, shared by a social media user, an elderly woman, a retired teacher, was opening a gift mug and pretending to smile as she read the message on it. Laughter erupted from the background as a principal's voice could be heard saying, "It was just a joke, darling." Most of the people who watched the video found the moment amusing, but the man's eyes were filled with tears. At that moment, the office door slowly opened. His assistant stuck their head in. "Mr. Granger, would you like me to refresh your coffee?" The man didn't turn around. He kept staring at the screen. He cleared his throat, but couldn't control his voice. "I remembered. The woman who brought me this far," he said in a hoarse voice. The assistant stared at him in surprise. "My teacher," the man said. "Laura. Miss Laura." The assistant tried to say something, but fell silent. Because for the first time, they saw tears streaming from the eyes of this powerful man, whose eyes usually shone with success. The man smiled faintly. "That woman, she was everything to me. The beginning of everything. But now, is this what she deserves?" He took a deep breath, wiped his eyes. Then he slowly stood up. "Start the preparations," he said. Actually, it had already begun. The assistant took a step back and nodded. "Understood, sir." The man turned toward the window. As his eyes lost themselves in the city's chaos, his mind wandered far away. He imagined a barefoot child, a faded backpack, and a tired yet loving teacher smiling warmly. One day, Laura had quietly sat beside him and asked, "How are you today?" It seemed like a regular day, but that question had changed his life. Now, it was his turn. The man's name was Ethan. Today, he was known as the CEO of a major corporation, the one signature behind million-dollar investments, and a donor to global charity funds. But for him, success wasn't just about reaching the top. For him, success meant not forgetting the people who had been by his side on the journey, from the cold nights when he had no blanket to sleep with, to the comfortable office he sat in today. Ethan had grown up in a troubled home. His father was often absent, and when he was home, he was either angry or drunk. His mother worked 2 jobs, trying to keep things afloat. Ethan would go to school every morning on an empty stomach, sitting quietly in a corner during breaks. While other kids ran around in their warm jackets, his jacket zipper wouldn't even close. His shoes were torn, the soles were coming off. Sometimes, he couldn't even afford socks. It was during those days that a new teacher came to the class, Laura. On the first day, when their eyes met, Ethan immediately looked down. But Laura didn't give up. Every morning, she would say, "Good morning, Ethan," calling him by name. And one day, she saw Ethan walking in the yard with his shoes stuck in the mud. She didn't say anything. But the next week, there was a new pair of shoes under Ethan's desk. It came from the school's clothing fund, they said, but Ethan knew who was behind it. Another winter, Ethan's hands were cracked, his skin starting to bleed. One day, Laura paused the lesson, pulled out some hand cream from her bag, and said, "We all need it." She made it look like she was passing it out to the whole class, but when she handed it specifically to Ethan, they locked eyes. In that moment, Ethan felt like he wasn't invisible. Laura was there for him not only financially but emotionally. Ethan was the quietest, yet the smartest student in the class. No one could see his inner world, but Laura did. She sensed the gem inside him. And one day, when Ethan wanted to apply for a major science project competition, his family told him, "Don't waste your time on silly things." Ethan lost hope, but Laura became his sponsor. She bought the project materials out of her own pocket and worked with him after school. When he won that competition, Ethan cried, because for the first time, someone had truly supported him. Time passed. Ethan got a scholarship to an excellent high school, then got accepted into a prestigious university. Every year, he sent Laura a postcard on her birthday. His signature was always the same. "The barefoot child is still walking. Thanks to you." Now, that child had become the man behind million-dollar deals. But the debt inside him had never been paid off, because that debt was not just financial, it was moral. And today, the cheap joke made about Laura had ignited the silent ledger of debt inside Ethan. That's why he didn't just cry. He made a decision. Laura's name would never be belittled again. It was the third morning of Laura's retirement. She sat in her old chair by the window, slowly holding her cooling coffee in her hands. The room was quiet. She hadn't even turned on the radio. At first, loneliness had felt like freedom to her. She wouldn't have to answer to anyone anymore. But now the silence was carrying the echoes of old memories. The sound of the school bell, children's laughter, the noise of recess. Everything felt so far away all of a sudden. She got up and headed to the front door. Out of habit, she opened the mailbox to check the morning mail. Magazines, a few bills, and in between, a thick, elegant envelope. It was different from the rest. It felt heavy, as if it were hiding a secret. On the front of the cream-colored envelope, there were just a few words. To the Honorable Laura. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. The seal was embossed. Laura carefully examined the envelope with her hands. For a moment, she hesitated to open it. Then, she slowly took out the card inside. The card's surface was velvety, the edges lined with gold foil. Inside were these words: "To celebrate the silent but indelible marks left by years spent together, we invite you to an evening honoring special individuals like you. The evening will remind us how small moments from the past can lead to great changes. We are sure that you will make the evening beautiful, not with your elegance, but with your presence. Date, Saturday time, 7 p.m. Venue, the Crescent Hall dress code. Formal note: this invitation is personal and has been prepared with sincerity. ******. Laura read the lines several times. The text had been carefully chosen. It seemed like a celebration of some kind. Maybe a charity event, maybe a retirees' reunion, maybe just a nostalgic tribute from old students. But one detail caught her attention. At the bottom corner of the envelope, there was a faint name. Ethan, the card in her hand, trembled slightly. Laura looked up. She stared out the window. That name, it echoed in her memory. That child, those eyes, that silent gratitude. The postcard she had received from him every birthday. It was always him. Now an adult, and clearly, he hadn't forgotten her. But why had he invited her? Why was tonight so mysterious? She didn't expect anything special to be done for her. Maybe a small memorial, maybe a thank you years later. She thought she shouldn't expect too much. That same day, in the Crescent Hall's grand, high-ceilinged room, there was busy preparation. Crystal chandeliers were being polished, tables were being carefully arranged, and satin ribbons were tied to every chair. Ethan's team was checking the final details. Messages collected from Laura's former students were being added to wall panels, and the PowerPoint presentation was being reviewed one last time. A large board had been placed in one corner of the entrance hall. It displayed old class photos, student doodles, memory notes, and in the center, one sentence. Sometimes, one person changes your entire life. This night is for that person. But Laura hadn't seen it yet. She still didn't know the purpose of the invitation. That evening, as the clock struck 6, Laura took out the simplest evening dress from her closet. Dark navy, simple cut, but elegant. She draped a silk shawl over her shoulders. When she stood in front of the mirror, she saw a face she hadn't seen in a long time. A woman who took care of herself. Her eyes were tired, but still shining. She placed the invitation in her bag and gave the address to the taxi driver. Throughout the ride, she was filled with a strange excitement. Not with expectation, but with a search for meaning. What will I find there? Is Ethan just trying to say hello? Maybe it's a fundraiser. Maybe I was invited as just an observer. When Laura arrived at the Crescent Hall, the friendly attendants greeted her at the entrance. "Mrs. Laura, we've been expecting you," they said. Laura raised an eyebrow slightly. She hadn't expected such a warm welcome. When she stepped into the hall, she was mesmerized. The high-ceilinged hall with crystal chandeliers looked like it was prepared for an opera night. People in elegant attire were speaking in hushed tones. Some were glancing at Laura, giving the impression that they knew her, but no one was openly acknowledging it. No one was clearly saying that she was the guest of honor. But there was respect in their eyes and anticipation. There was a secret hanging in the air. Laura sat in a chair at the back. She held her head high. Her heart was beating slightly faster. She had been used to staying in the background her entire life. But tonight, something was about to change. She didn't know yet, but the moments were approaching when her name would echo in the middle of that hall, in front of everyone's eyes. Laura was sitting in the back rows of the hall. She squinted as she looked around. The lights dimmed slightly, and the hall was bathed in a soft golden hue. The gentle melodies of a violin group echoed. People were seated, and the whispers had faded. The host stepped onto the stage and, after a brief welcome speech, announced a single name. And now, I invite the host of tonight, the one who will share the spirit of this evening with us, Ethan Granger. The hall erupted in applause. Laura turned her head and looked toward the stage. For a moment, she froze as she saw the man walking toward the microphone with confident steps. Behind the mature lines on his face, she could still see the eyes of that young boy. Ethan stood in front of the microphone. The room was completely silent. "Good evening," he said slowly. "Tonight, many people know me. Yes, I'm a successful businessman. Yes, some newspapers call me a miracle child. But very few know how I started my life." A pause. The room held its breath. "I was a barefoot child, sometimes without breakfast, most of the time without love. My mother worked, my father. It was better when he wasn't home. School wasn't just a building for me. It was the only place I felt safe. And there was a woman. She would enter the classroom quietly, but she brought peace with her. Everyone called her Miss Laura. For me, she was a hero." Laura straightened in her chair. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but she still didn't understand. She still couldn't fully grasp why Ethan had organized this evening. Ethan continued, "One day, my shoes were torn." She noticed. Without saying a word, a new pair arrived. She handed them to me without speaking. One day, my hands were cracked. She took out hand cream from her bag and, as if to distribute it to the whole class, she offered it to me, looking me in the eyes. She always made eye contact with me. I didn't understand what it meant back then, but now I know. Respect. Silent support. Unconditional kindness. A few people in the hall began wiping away tears. Years passed. I became successful. But with every new signature, with every new project, the same sentence echoed in my mind. If I'm here, it's because of her. Ethan took a deep breath. Then the curtain behind him rose. A giant screen dropped from the ceiling. On it, only one message from Laura's former students was enlarged. "Thank you for giving me a future." Then Ethan turned back to the podium and continued. "Today here, I officially announced the creation of a student aid foundation named after Miss Laura." The applause erupted. Ethan raised his hand and continued. "Our foundation will cover all educational expenses for students in economic hardship. The first donation, $1 million. And this is just the beginning." The whole room stood up. People were applauding, some were crying. Laura, however, still seemed frozen in place. She had her hands clasped over her chest, tears streaming down her face. Ethan spoke again. "But it's not over. Laura had a dream years ago. She said, 'One day, I want to see the world.' That day is today. Miss Laura." Ethan locked eyes with her. "It is my honor to gift you a world tour. The entire trip has been planned. Your suitcase is even ready." Once again, the room erupted in applause. This time, cameras were recording. Flashbulbs were popping, and social media was broadcasting the event live. Suddenly, an attendant walked up to the stage. He gently took Laura's hand and helped her stand. Amid the applause, she walked slowly toward the stage. In her simple dress, with her tear-filled face, she was the true star of the evening in everyone's eyes. When she took the microphone, the room fell into complete silence. "I just did my job," she said in a soft voice. "I love the children, because once I was in their shoes. I never expected such a huge return. But now, I can tell you this: a kind word, a small gesture, silent support. Sometimes it can change a child's life." She bowed her head. The applause once again filled the room. Even some teachers, the principal, the one who gave her that mug, weren't clapping. Their heads were lowered. The shame was written all over their faces. Because the woman who had been humiliated on stage that day had now become a hero honored by the entire country. A few weeks later, Florence the Sunset bathed a small cafe in Florence in an orange hue. Laura sat at a table overlooking the Arno River. A cup of espresso in her hand, an open newspaper in front of her. The headlines read, $1 mug was disrespected, but the fund created in her name raised $1 million in donations. The silent legacy of a small teacher, changing the lives of thousands of children. Do you know who that woman was? The hero in the heart of the barefoot child. Laura closed the newspaper. She smiled, her eyes filled with tears. But this time, the tears weren't from pain. They were from pride, from a loving memory, from an honorable farewell. A waiter came up and asked, "Would you like anything else?" Laura shook her head. "Just this moment," she said. "I'd like to stay here a little longer." And the people in the cafe may not have known her, but the world now did. Laura was a teacher. Simple, silent, but a legendary name. True value is sometimes hidden in silence. And sometimes, a mug can be the beginning of a revolution. Don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who speak the least.